1989. What a year it was. 1989 was the year the Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan. Later that year, the Soviet Union fell, and the Cold War was over. Or so we thought. Gas was, on average, an unbelievable 97 cents a gallon. The Exxon Valdez ran aground in Prince William Sound, releasing 240,000 barrels of oil into the ocean. In China, student protests in Tiananmen Square led to a governmental crackdown causing unknown numbers of casualties. It's estimated to be in the hundreds. And crime in American cities was reaching its peak, only to trend downwards in the following years. That is until 2018 or 2019, when crime statistics spiked across the US. Living in an American city right now seems to be more dangerous than it has been in a long time. In some cities, crime has reached new, historic levels. According to a study done by the Council on Criminal Justice in July of this year, several specific types of crime have spiked, and most of the rest of them have trended upward. This is despite the ever-changing ways cities define these crimes in order to hide the numbers, allegedly. Let's look at some of the statistics. Homicides, up. And here are the cities with the biggest increases. Aggravated assault, up. Assault with a firearm, up. Motor vehicle theft, up. Robberies, up. And here are the cities with the biggest increases in robberies. Larceny, or theft of personal property, up. And here's the cities you know. So the bottom line is, move out of the cities. But good news, domestic violence, while still high, went down. So in summary, people have stopped beating their wives and started beating each other out in the streets.
Why you boring me? I'm right.
Criminality not only impacts primary victims, but it can have secondary and tertiary effects for years, if not contained and abated. The grief, the trauma, the constant feelings of dread and hopelessness can bring in darkness. Darkness born of desperation, anger, and a desire for vengeance. Some time ago, a little boy living in Gotham City witnessed the murder of both his mother and his father. Being such a miserable, crime-infested city, the boy had to grow up knowing that his parents' killer would likely never be made to answer for his crimes. Eventually, out of a growing desire for justice, this man decides that the path of the vigilante is how he will personally fight crime. As he thought about this, he faced one major hurdle. How does he protect his own identity and those of his loved ones? Perhaps a mask. Perhaps one that instills fear, dark and mysterious and dangerous. Something that was born to slip in and out of the shadows. He chose that which caused fear in himself. He chose to become the Batman. Not only is this one of my favorite movies, but it's one that's been asked for quite a bit in the comments of my previous videos. So hubba hubba hubba, money money money, it's time to review Batman 1989.
What do you want?
My face on the $1 bill.
You must be joking.
Do I look like I'm joking?
1989 was a watershed year for movies, an impressive list to say the least. Released that year were great films such as Glory, Born on the 4th of July, Rain Man, The Abyss, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the last Indiana Jones movie, Field of Dreams, Dead Poets Society, Major League, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Driving Miss Daisy, and White Little Mermaid. Those movies that came out that final year of the 1980s represented a blend of what we loved about movies from the 1980s with the new lifestyle and cultural trends that would emerge in the 1990s. The 80s were a time of economic prosperity, the looming dread of war with the Soviet Union,
You crossed my line of death!
cocaine, and greed. The 1990s felt like an emerging teenager, questioning the ethics and traditions of the 80s. The movies that came out after the 80s took a darker, more introspective tone, bucking the trend that preceded them. There was a cultural shift in the 90s away from the standards set in the years before. Sometimes that shift brought new and interesting perspectives to our common mythos. Sometimes we just got stinkers, like Fletch Lives, Young Einstein, Cyborg. These were all released in 1989 as well. 1989 also saw the release of one of my favorite, if not one of the most consequential movies of all time. In the before times, before consumer internet, we had to read lines of text or have someone read them to us on the television to get our information. Startling information was being released about a new Batman movie. News that would send shockwaves through the public and cause a lot of anxiety and doubt about how good it was going to be. Let's go down the list of questions that we all had in our minds. First of all, Michael Keaton as Batman? Until then, he was known as being a schlubby comedic actor, starring in films like The Dream Team, which opened, ironically, just a few weeks before Batman, Beetlejuice the year before, Gung Ho, Johnny Dangerously, Mr. Mom, The Night Shift, and a long list of television appearances, mostly comedic. Second, Oscar Award winner Jack Nicholson as the Joker? Until then, he was known more as a dramatic actor. Though he did do a few comedies, Jack Nicholson was supposedly a more serious actor, not someone who would throw their career away by starring in a lame comic book movie. I remember having some very serious discussions with my peers about the possibility of switching the actors in their roles. Michael Keaton, hot off of Beetlejuice, one might say a version of the Joker, was perfect to play the clown prince of crime. Nicholson, however, it's hard to see him as playing Batman. In 1989, he was at the tender age of 51. And if you know anything about Jack Nicholson, those years were not treaded lightly. Jack Nicholson as Batman might work today with Hollywood's fascination with deconstructionist themes, but back then, 51 was a little too old to play the part. But seemingly much more reasonable than what we got, the reverse. Third, Prince is doing the soundtrack? Prince? Purple Rain Prince? It was really hard to see how one of the greatest pop rock anthem musicians would fit into what's really a reboot of Batman. Maybe they were going for the campiness of the 1960s Batman, but things were not looking good. Finally, Tim Burton. As a director, his only movie that people could identify as a Tim Burton movie was Beetlejuice, which came out the year before. Of course, he had directed several movies previous to Beetlejuice, notably Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985. Beetlejuice grew a following over time. Now, it's a film that's highly regarded, especially since Gina Davis, convicted shoplifter Winona Ryder, and alleged, at the time of this recording, murderer Alec Baldwin went on to have more or less big careers. At the time, however, it was notable because it had a great performance from Michael Keaton and bizarre and interesting visuals.
Nice fucking models!
But turning that into Batman, needless to say, doubts were bubbling up to the surface. Unless you're of a certain age, it's hard to describe how dramatically different Batman was from the superhero comics and movies of the time. Superman came out more than a decade earlier and was awash in bright primary colors, all smiles and waving the American flag proudly. I miss Superman. After Superman, there was the drought. No quality superhero movies. Comic book sales, after plummeting in the 1950s and 1960s, saw either stagnant sales levels or a continued decline. The last live-action Batman we saw was back in 1966 with Adam West and Burt Ward. Needless to say, the concept of comic book superheroes was not to be taken seriously. We might have become nostalgic now that a few years have gone by, but at the time, during the late 80s, comic books were in critical condition and the prognosis was grim. Adjusted for inflation, Superman in 1978 grossed around $1.2 billion. This represented a high point for comic book movies. Then came the crash. For over a decade, there were few bright spots in the superhero movie world, but for the most part, it was disappointment after disappointment. Even the Superman sequels could never match the impact of the first one. Supergirl was terrible. Then there were the true bottom dwellers. Remember Condor Man? 'Cause I don't. Then on June 23rd, 1989, Batman flapped its wings into cinemas. Initial reactions from the mainstream critics were lukewarm to positive. You know I love pointing these out, especially when they had to go back and eat their words. At the time, Roger Ebert said, "Did I care about the relationship between these two caricatures?" Speaking of Batman and the Joker. Did either one have the depth of even a comic book character? Not really. And there was something off-putting about the anger beneath the movie's violence. The movie's problem is that no one seemed to have any fun making it, and it's hard to have fun watching it. It's a depressing experience. It's the opposite of a comic book, tragic book. I have a lot of respect for Roger Ebert, but every once in a while he misses the mark. Big time. Another reviewer, Vincent Canby of the New York Times, said this after the release in 1989. The only other members of this cast to make any impression are Michael Gough, who plays Jeeves, to Bruce Wayne's pallid Bertie Wooster. Michael Gough played Alfred, I don't know what he's talking about. And Kim Basinger, who adds a little welcome heat to the movie as a photographer with whom Bruce spends one night of love. So Alfred and Vicky Vale were the only two characters to make an impression on this reviewer. Once again, the professional reviewers sometimes live in an echo chamber. Their opinions at times miss the target, sometimes by a huge distance.
Let's see. It was the best of times. It was the blurst of times. You stupid monkey. You shut up.
But at the same time, the fans saw the movie. And like fuel to the flame, Batman exploded. Batman 1989 starts with one of the best and most iconic introductions of the main character in a superhero movie.
What are you? I'm Batman.
We look back now and kind of shrug because we've seen lesser copies of this play out in other movies time after time after time. But at the time, it was an incredible and memorable introduction to the new Batman. Almost instantly, any doubts about Michael Keaton playing the Caped Crusader were cast aside. We are also introduced to Tim Burton's version of Gotham City, gritty and modern in some aspects, but also stuck in a 1950s film noir detective movie. Think of 1980s crime-ridden New York City combined with the 1920s Chicago, mafia fedoras and all. In some ways, Gotham City is as interesting and complex of a character as the protagonist or the antagonist. A city gripped by massive organized crime with all the violence and bloodshed associated with it. We are then introduced to Jack Napier, the precursor to the Joker, a vain and cold-blooded mafia enforcer ranked as the top lieutenant in the Grissom crime family. Jack is part of a classic mafioso power struggle between himself and Grissom, played full blast by Jack Palance. On top of that, Jack is sleeping with Grissom's woman, Alicia, played by Jerry Hall. Grissom, aware of what's happening, sets up a trap for Jack at Axis Chemicals, their key industry and the face of legitimacy for that crime family. Grissom feeds crooked cops on the police force information about Jack being at Axis Chemicals. In the ambush, and despite Batman's intervention, Jack falls into a vat of chemicals and presumed dead. Jack somehow survives, but the damage to his skin is nearly total. A porcelain white veneer covers Jack where his skin once was. Furthermore, the mob doctor, inadequately practiced and under-equipped, further disfigures Jack's face in an attempt to reconstruct his facial features after the damage done at Axis Chemicals. His face, damaged beyond repair, was pulled back into a permanent sneer, a horrifying visage of tragedy and comedy. The final and most damning damage was done to Jack's mind. After the transformation to his skin and face, the vain and cold-blooded Jack Napier finally got the joke. The Joker was born. Now seemingly removed from any place in society, the Joker was free to move on with his plan to share his joke with Gotham City. The Joker then kills Grissom and takes over the operation of the crime family. However, instead of the usual mafia efforts, the entire organization, or at least the part he didn't eliminate, would be focused on one thing: running Gotham into the ground through the application of fear and mass murder. His chosen tool was the CIA's secret and experimental nerve gas, listed as DDID, or as he called it, Smilex. It is unclear what drew the Joker towards conflict with Batman. I just received a comment. Okay, I just got a comment on one of my videos. The trailer for this Batman video, the Joker music thing, the short that I made. So in that short that I made, I put that this video that I'm working on, re-recording some audio now, I said this video was coming soon. And Skirmitar, who's been a subscriber of mine from the very beginning, and I think we met when I was watching the full Aussie, and he commented on the video, since it's been several weeks, not soon enough, quote unquote. 100% correct. I am so sorry I dropped the ball on this one. Real life has been a hot mess. So I'm happy to be back in front of the microphone recording again. So onward with the show. It is unclear what drew the Joker towards conflict with Batman. Was Batman seen as potentially being in the way of his plans? Was Joker envious of the attention and media spotlight Batman got? Was Joker spurned on by competition to be the biggest freak terrorizing Gotham? Regardless of what started it, ultimately both Joker and Batman were heading on a collision course. It was their fate to be locked in eternal combat, one's existence dependent on the other, forever validating their own existence by the existence of the other. Or, on the other hand, one of them would have to be destroyed. It had to be this way. Batman, by dropping Jack Napier in the vat of acid, made the Joker. And, shh, don't tell anybody. Did you know that Batman's parents were killed by Jack Napier, who became the Joker later? They were killed outside a theater. It's not like that scene hasn't been shown to us in other Batman movies again and again and again and again.
Why did you say that name?
So the flip side of that coin in this version is the Joker also created the Batman. What a small world. Batman and the Joker battle it out, not just with violence, but with their wits. Considering what Batman has become in present times, this is one of the few iterations of Batman being the world's greatest detective. Batman does his sleuthing while the Joker works plan after plan trying to sow chaos into Gotham. But let's pause here for a second. What exactly was the Joker's plan? And maybe you could call this a criticism of the movie. I don't think so. But it's left me wondering. Pre-Joker Jack Napier clearly had ambition to replace Carl Grissom and run Gotham as the leader of the Grissom, or I suppose at that point, the Napier crime syndicate. But once he becomes the Joker, his plan gets a bit murky. First he says,
Holy freak. Terrorizes. Wait till they get a load of me.
Then he takes over Grissom's organization. Then he kills most of that organization. Then he wants to kill the citizens of Gotham through an elaborate poisoning scheme. Then he wants to win the hearts and minds of Gotham by making Batman out to be the real perpetrator. Then he goes back to wanting to kill the citizens of Gotham through a direct chemical attack during his parade. It can seem confusing, but I believe his plan can be summarized as using terror to exert control over Gotham City.
Decent people shouldn't live here. They'd be happier someplace else.
It's clear that both Jack Napier and the Joker hate Gotham City. Maybe he blames Gotham for making him a freak. Though earlier I said he was sowing chaos in the city, it's clear that's not his primary motivation, unlike Heath Ledger's Joker in the Dark Knight trilogy. Chaos is his tool for control, so those appearance and tactics might have changed. He seems to be driven by the same ambition that Jack Napier had so long ago. I've always been a fan of the Joker. I remember making my first mixtape by connecting the RCA audio outs on my tape deck and mixing lines from the movie with portions of heavy metal riffs. It became known as the Joker tape, and me and my friends would get stoned, or worse, and listen to it. And it was the funniest thing ever to us. We were also very stupid. The Joker tape is long gone, but if we were to listen to it today, it would be utter nonsense, and I might just die from cringe, but it's still better than modern music. The lesson to be learned here is that drugs are bad, people. So there's a prevailing theory, mostly confirmed in the comic books, that there are in fact 3 versions of the Joker. Recently, Jeff Johns, working for DC, went ahead and made the 3 Joker theory into 3 actual Jokers and thus ruined any mystique. In the first version, really from the 1930s to the 1950s, the Joker was portrayed as a crazed killer, a master criminal, even going so far as to burn smiles on people's faces and making masks out of people's skin. As comics became more popular and the American population became more sensitive to the level of violence, there was sudden outrage blaming comics for real-world violence. Stop me if this sounds familiar. So in 1954, the Comics Code Authority was formed. This was an effort by the comic book companies themselves to censor their own content in order to please a vocal group of people who were deeply offended by the content that they had full control over purchasing or avoiding. Think of it as the birth of modern-day Twitter keyboard warriors. So in the end, the first Joker was not killed by Batman. He was killed by OG Karens and a weak-spined comic book industry. From 1956 to the 1970s, a new, gentler Joker was born. The second Joker was a prankster who wanted to rob banks and get rich, but could never hurt a fly, because if he demonstrated any violence, there would be outrage. Who wouldn't want to buy comics with a villain who is basically the clown prince of crime? But not that kind of crime. Well, apparently a lot of people didn't want to buy them, because in the early 1970s, after seeing that outrage does not equal sales, and watching their profits tank, comics finally figured out that maybe it was better to write interesting characters than to cater to complainers. So the third Joker was born and still exists in some form today. He was born in an era where comics spent a great deal of time dealing with, rather clumsily I might add, with real issues such as mental health and alcoholism. The Joker would become a crazed psychopath, driven to insanity by the world around him, in and out of Arkham Asylum, only to be the agent of chaos, because he was, insane. Am I getting to the point? Maybe. 3 Jokers, 3 archetypes to base your movie version of the Joker on. Because in the movies, the 3 Joker theory still holds up. In the 1960s, Cesar Romero's Joker could easily fit into the 1950s Silver Age silly prankster Joker. The Christopher Nolan Dark Knight Joker is an agent of chaos. So he would be the 1970s Bronze or Modern Age Joker. That leaves the 1989 Joker. Jack Nicholson's portrayal of the Joker is clearly the master criminal, or the Golden Age Joker, before the comic book authority bent the knee. And of those 3 Jokers, my favorite one was the 1989 mafioso Joker, the crime lord with a wicked sense of humor. There have been several iterations of the Joker, but there can only be one that I consider the best, or at least the one I identify with the most. As a movie, and as a character, the 1989 Joker was by far the most memorable, the most intriguing, the most ruthless, and my favorite. Before you start typing, but Heath Ledger's Joker, yes, his version was very, very good, and this might be a hot take. I will admit that his portrayal did have an impact on people who clearly favor his version rather than the other 2. There is one cataclysmic example of someone really taking his admiration too far, but I dare not speak of it here because YouTube would nuke my channel, and you know, free speech is a myth. But I'll ask you this. If Heath Ledger had not overdosed and died while hanging out with the twins, would we look at his portrayal the same way? Perhaps it's a generational thing. My Joker's the 1989 version. Emo kids have the Heath Ledger version, and now I know why my dad was arrested for squirting people with his flour. It all makes sense now. Batman 1989 not only made indelible impressions on the viewing audience, but also served as a spark that led to the rebirth of comic book fandom and a serious look at comic book properties as a viable and profitable movie commodity. It was enough proof to Hollywood that superhero films could reach a mainstream audience. And when they smell money and they aren't busy capitulating to the angry mob, and they're not doing that other thing I keep on hearing about, you can be sure that they're going to try to replicate the success of that film that made that kind of money. Batman 1989 really represents the birth of the modern, realistic, some say gritty superhero genre. Now, every superhero was going to get their own movie where they battle not only the villain, but their own inner demons. Admittedly, it was a slow start after 1989. In 1990, Darkman was released, and it was alright. In 1991, The Rocketeer came out, and it was pretty good. In 1992, Batman Returns, one of my favorites for all its flaws. 1993, Super Mario Bros., which the less that can be said about that one, the better. 1994, The Crow, The Shadow, The Mask. So every year, more and more comic book adaptations, ranging from horrible to alright, were released. The success of 1998's Blade and the X-Men movie in 2000 really pushed the foot down on the accelerator. Fast forward to 2008, the age of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was born. Most people don't count the Incredible Hulk, even though it wasn't entirely terrible. For the next decade, we were bombarded with every superhero from Thor to Ant-Man. DC, not wanting to miss out, put out the fantastic Dark Knight trilogy, then immediately shit the bed with the Snyderverse.
Why did you say that, Dad?
Then, on April 29th, 2019, the era of the comic book movie ended. Oh, Hollywood's still trying to milk that cow, but its udders are all dried out. The love is dead. No more lining up for the midnight showing. No more dressing up as Fat Thor to impress your wife, who left you and just took the kids. They all rode into the sunset, just like the hero of the old westerns, never to be seen again. Iron Man, dead. Captain America, old and dead, and now somehow racist? The Hulk was feminized. The Thor's a clown now, and the entire DC universe got locked away in a mental asylum.
Why did you say that, Dad?
Never to be released. But don't be heavy-hearted. Looking back, there have been times as bleak as they are now. After Batman 1966, which was not exactly a high point by the way, it was a decade of stinkers before Christopher Reeves put on the cape. After Superman in 1978, it was really 11 years before people really went back to the theaters for a superhero movie. After Batman 1989, though there were some bright spots along the way, it was another 11 or 12 years before people got the comic book movie they really enjoyed. So after another decade of utter crap, we might see another rebirth of this type of movie. Capes and cowls and secret identities, facing fascinating and evil and mysterious villains. Movies that inspire the youth and reminds us adults what it takes to be a hero. One can only hope. And if nothing else, remember these words of wisdom.
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. The next milestone for this channel is 500 subscribers. We're almost there. Also, consider watching one of my other breakdowns. The movie breakdowns, not the mental kind. I, quote-unquote, recently released a video about John Carpenter's The Thing. That video is one that I'm particularly proud of, and nobody watched. Also, I have a short list of videos I'd like to make. But if you have a suggestion, place it in the comments below. The suggestion for this video, Batman 1989, came from the comments. With each video, I'm trying to improve my writing, the editing, and overall quality that it and overall quality that I deliver to you. This is a one-man operation, so any support that you can give to help this channel grow is greatly appreciated. And finally, if you'd like to support this channel financially and would like to see your name in the credits, please check out the link to my Buy Me a Coffee page. Membership has its perks. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Eckhart! Think about the future!
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission:
to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations,
to boldly go where no man has gone before.